welcome to Crafts and Crime. I'm Amy.
I'm Elaine.
And as usual, craft and a crime. Today's been a little crazy. I am so tired today. I didn't sleep good last night. It's been a long week. I think this was the week that I had something every single day.
Yes.
Yeah. My daughter had to go to the dentist. She has to get some dental work done. Yeah. And then
I was like, I thought you didn't have anything Wednesday. I forgot it was really early. So we expected the rest of the day to be however was going to follow that.
Yeah. So, yeah, she had a dentist appointment Monday, Wednesday. I had an appointment Monday. Oh my gosh, we recorded Monday. There was a lot. And then, friends over. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all got to hang out. That was fun. So, yeah, we've been keeping busy and working on podcast stuff. We fixed, I'm sure by the time this comes out, it's we'll already announce it. We fixed, what was it? Amazon Music and Audible.
Mm-hmm. So because I guess they stream together.
Yeah, so it was the link.
I think Amazon bought Audible.
Mm-hmm. And so it was the link was messed up. So they fixed that. So we got a link tree
officially everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Everywhere that I could think of.
Mm-hmm.
So...
yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot.
Oh, there is. And so, even when I was building our link tree, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many. But that's a good thing because, anybody can listen.
Right. And I mean, not everything that's available to us is available outside of our country.
Oh, I know.
So that there's, different kind of restrictions. And so I'm sure some of those play outside of here.
Yeah. So we're pretty much everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we can see stats of, where people are listening from on our account thingy, and it shows a lot of other countries. So I don't know if we have a current cat situation.
Dude.
Every time we record, Frankie has to be in the mix. Yeah, 2 of my cats I inherited from my aunt, and today, as we record, the actual day today that we're recording, it's been 1 year since she passed away. So, yeah, so we've had them for about a year. We got them not right when she passed, but it was a week or so later.
Yeah.
And, so Frankie likes to be in the mix. He's very needy. And he likes to hide out in here. So he's like, hey, you guys, what are you doing in here?
Yeah. But, he's all that other one's running around.
I know. Yeah, so we have, the cats and kids, and my kids keep screaming, so hopefully that's not gonna, well, one of my kids is screaming. It's always one of my kids screaming when we try to record.
Friday.
Yeah, it is Friday as we record, and I am ready for the weekend.
Me too.
Yeah, and your husband took, extra days off work, so he's got, a 4-day weekend.
Yeah, it'll feel like a mini vacation, and he's taking a nap.
Yeah, while we record.
Yeah.
So, perfect time. So, anyways, Kate, tell me your craft. I'm ready.
Okay, so, my last recording was about the history of paper, riveting. And now this is more in depth about paper making itself, along with the invention of one of our UK extinct crafts.
Okay.
So, this is paper part 2. This is about making the paper.
Yeah, part 2.
So, as with a lot of things, baking, any kind of craft type of thing where you're going to have to use water, clean water matters, even with paper making. And so, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is what is the deepest depths of paper making history. So it's only about the 1400s and up. So this is basically the process that was used all throughout that time, because this is what we have historical writings on.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the best paper started with clean water. That was important because we're not thinking about the fact that these fibers are going to soak in water. So if the water is crap and dirty.
Yeah. Well, that's like when you were talking about just the hairs in the paper or something.
Exactly.
So it does
just
make
from
sense.
The vat worker. So,
so if the water's
there's
nasty.
leaves and dirt and
pond
stuff.
water.
So they would levy out the water in a little river, and they would canal it through different filtration systems, which were baskets full of sand, and then another basket full of linens, and then they did know charcoal filtration a little bit, but not a lot, or diphtheria and typhoid
Yeah.
wouldn't have been such a thing.
Exactly.
And so it started with very clean water.
Okay.
Another interesting thing was that this paper pulp also absorbed heavy metals in the water. So unfortunately, the people who worked in paper milling industries tended to have pretty yucky hands because the processing later on. So this is kind of a thing. They had a lot of heavy metals absorbed through their hands as well, which is because water was so different. And that water was like the freshest that hasn't been used and filtered the way we do now. So the way that we are working with this is paper made from linens. And so I did make a little mention of it. In Little Women, the characters talk about the rag bag. Now, what that was old rags of clothing, bits of materials and stuff. You would bag them up all together, and it was your recycling. And you would recycle those materials, and you would make about a quarter for a big bag. That was for the entire month.
Man, if only it was like that now, because like, you know, when you go through your clothes or like throw out old towels.
Well, it is a thing. It does happen. In the United States, we have these different kinds of donation bins that are usually steel in parking lots, and you pull down a drawer and you drop clothing into those. And that is used for that. Polyester fabric clothing is taken and melted and recycled, really? And it's reused.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there you go. That wasn't even in my notes.
It was just off the top of your head.
Yeah. So we do that, but we don't get paid for it.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, pay me a quarter from a bag.
It's basically just, I mean, right? It's something. It's basically just less going into a landfill. So the way that this starts, there are sorters, which were all women, just historically, and they had to sort these rags, clothing pieces, by hand, of course, by color and the quality or the fineness of these materials. So they went into 6 categories for the best paper mills. Most paper mills was just like fine, medium, and coarse. But there were 6 categories: super fine, fine, fine seams, medium seams, and coarse. And so these are also like by color.
So seams meaning like it was sewn or something?
The chunk of fabric that is left has a seam through it. So it requires more work because it has been sewn through that bit as well. And so that's always a thicker material.
That makes sense.
So they were so precise by eye and touch because messing up the sorting meant the quality was different, and it could spoil the entire next process. So just like if you've ever watched a video of a factory conveyor belt and things are passing by in the sorters, you just can't believe how fast they are, and they're eyeballing and they're picking and flicking out stuff that's not right. As usually a laser does this now, and it'll like kick out with air and it like shoots out stuff. But a lot of these are still done by eye. And that's why there's 1,000 people on the line, because everyone's going to miss something, but you just watch them. Zoom, zoom, zoom. And so the ladies
and if
were
a lot's
so
like going
fast.
through.
Yeah. And so these women were so fast. They'd look through the bag and they would just grab it and they could immediately sort it super quickly. Wow. So the next process is called retting. 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 And what they did, it's been the same documented. This was the process back in ancient times in Asia where paper started. This basin was what they call a dress stone basin. And that was just chunks of rock taken from a quarry, shaped and made into a basin and mortared together. The bottom of this basin was removable, or it was angled so it had a little drainage. And what they are going to do is they're going to compost these rags.
Like break them down?
Yes.
What?
Because remember, these are all natural fibers. So this process is going to break down the entire cellular structure. It's going to open up that cellulose, take away any roughness. And the way they started is they layer them up, not packed tight, just like anyone who knows how to compost. You just throw it in and you don't pack it down, and they just wet these rags. And they are kept wet and tossed every 15 to 20 days.
Okay.
The process takes about 5 to 6 weeks
Oh, I thought you were
just
saying months.
this. No, just 5 to 6 weeks of just this process. And as the water drains out, it just drips out as it needs to, whatever composting fluids come out. And then they toss it 15, 20 days. And they do this again. That 5 to 6 weeks isn't a set in stone. Haha, stone. Because they're in stone basins. It's not a set in stone time, because just like composting isn't. It's science. Yeah, it's breaking down raw materials.
Yeah, that's like your little compost.
Yeah, my little bucket.
Thing. Yeah, your bucket. It's like within this time frame.
That realistically it should be done in 5 to 6 weeks. The way that they knew it was ready was when the temperature was so warm in the depth of the pile that if you put your hand into the inside of the pile, you could only leave it for like a couple seconds. It was that hot.
Ooh.
Yeah, like burn your hand.
Yeah.
And so that's when they knew that it was ready. Fine material took a lot longer because they were tighter weaved, better quality. So it took longer for that to break down. And coarse actually took faster because the coarser, bulkier material, think like jute, think like thick, coarse, like burlap, raggedy, had a lot more fiber on the outside to rot and break down that material because it wasn't bound as tight.
Yeah.
And older took the longest because it's dry. The material is so parched, essentially. They weren't using fabric softener.
Yeah.
And so it took the longest. And so all of these things mattered. If it was old, they had to feel it and know that it was old.
That's weird. Yeah. Well, I guess it makes sense. You could always tell, like, think about an old towel and a new towel.
That's very, very true.
Like when we bought new towels recently.
Oh, yeah. They're like, so plush. It's like a blanket.
I know. It's so fluffy.
So when they're done, the fabric is rinsed off. And lye is used to stop the fermentation, and it balances the pH. It brings it way down because lye is a type of a salt along with like lime. But lime comes from a calcium, and that's going to come in too. One of the things that happens during the retting process, and if anybody knows, I don't mean to rub a raw nerve here, but when vegetable rot, how it gets like slimy and thick and gross.
Yeah. Like what was under my fridge.
Yeah, exactly. That just happened. That's how I was like, I know this is going to hit you. What happens is the cellulose structure bulks up and it is rotting. And so it gets this gelatinous coating that is like, if you've ever gotten like flax wet or chia.
Oh, the chia, see, that's slimy.
But it's very insoluble. Okay. So there is actually like remnants of that gooey bit that they can tell. They're able to test paper that's old and find what it was made out of because of this. That structure doesn't rinse off. And if it's not done properly, if it's not basically rotted, I don't know why it's not called rotting instead of retting, it will stay, and it makes it difficult for the pulp to bind together. And if they don't rinse it properly enough and they just try to go whatever, this is going to be fine, the paper in time, I'm kind of scooting ahead, is going to shrink dramatically.
Oh, okay.
Because it's bloated up.
And then it like dries or whatever, and it's like
shrinks. Yeah. It's exactly retaining water. It's exactly what's happening.
Okay.
So the next process after the retting is going to be the beating or stamping process.
Okay.
This was done by hand. We're kind of going back to gold beating a little bit if you listen to that episode. So it was done with essentially a mallet and nails at the end of it. And it was used to agitate a large vat of water. And so they would basically they would jam it in and slosh it around, and it would never touch the bottom, and it was shredding up the fibers. Just imagine like an agitating washing machine. And these nails are different lengths, and they go through different varying processes, and the different lengths make different agitations and rip and stretch the fibers.
Nails on the end of the mallet, like, so it's like just stabbing it, almost like
exactly
micro needling or whatever.
Exactly, it's like felting, but it's
felting.
Huge.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is what is ripping up those fibers, and it's shredding all of them to essentially be as uniform. But it's not going to happen. But it gets very, very close. In around 1650 to 1680, something called the Hollander beater is invented, which is a water wheel, and the water wheel pumps up and down and moves the shaft to twist and rotate a barrel that has beaters attached to it, and so it all became mechanized. So just a constant
you don't have
stamping
to manually do it. Okay.
And so, but it didn't. It's pretty much just as I explained with gold beating. This mechanized version wasn't any faster or more reliable. It was actually just as well done by hand. It was just they could do more.
Yeah,
they could do massive vats and and, less manpower. So an interesting part that came next, possibly not always, but it did have to happen quite often, was the original bleaching of
to make it
fabric
white or
before the retting process. Yes, so they had to bleach linens that have been dyed. So this process was, the rags were still sorted by color, because obviously this is going to lead into a little hint on my next craft. They were sorted by colors, and they're still their fineness in the exact same way. And they were washed and soaked in lye for 36 to 48 hours. And after that, they're taked out and they are blocked for people who know fiber crafts. But they just stretch it out.
Yeah.
So they stretched it out because that was opening up the entire fiber structure, and they would stretch it out until it was dry in the sun. And the next process is called bucking. And this was, they soaked the rags again for 3 to 4 hours. They took them out, stretched them, exposed to the sunlight, and they would continue wetting it with water for 6 hours solid. So someone had to be there. It could not dry, but in the sun. So it's continued to be wet for 6 hours. Then it's left to dry overnight. And it is bucked again, which is the process of the lye soak for 3 to 4 hours, stretching, wetting for 6 hours, drying overnight. This has happened. This is about 10 to 16 times.
Oh, wow.
They do this. Before another process, this process is called souring. Now, remember, this is all just to bleach fabric.
That is so weird.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the souring process is exactly what it sounds like. They use soured rye or bran and water or buttermilk. They soak the rags for days in this mixture.
Ew.
Then they wash it. They buck it again, which is the lye, water, soak, rinse. And they just do this until it's wide enough.
That's crazy.
And
just
that could take
rinse, repeat.
Who knows how long.
Yeah.
It could take 6 to 8 months for just this process, just bleaching the dyes out.
And this was just because the whiter the paper,
the richer you were.
The richer. Yeah, so it took
the
longer.
higher quality. Exactly. So here comes color theory and a little hint for my next craft. They toned it with blue coloring, just a tiny bit, to off-cast any yellowish, brownish color that was left over. And then they would, if it was a long continuous piece of fabric, which it was occasionally, it would be starched and then dried for cloth. Or if they were the rags, which was the same process, then it was done to the retting to make bright white paper.
Oh, okay.
So, yes, this took 6 to 8 months. So, if this is the paper making, now we are on to my extinct craft, which is the making of a decal. Now, that word, a mold for paper, there's always been a mold throughout history of some kind. In Asia, they were probably figuring like sheets of silk already made that was dipped into the vat of pulp mixture. And, drained out. And so this process was around this time, which, I'm saying we're back to about the 1400s still, is exactly what it is now. It's a frame with some kind of screen on top of it.
Yeah.
And the screens that they used back then were, woven like a fishing net, and it's tightly wrapped over a frame, just like a picture frame. And they dip it into the vat. And a worker helps them pulley it up and out of the vat.
Okay.
Now it is the shaker's job. He does this by hand. He grabs the shaker tray, which is just the mold of the frame, and he shimmies it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. He knows the weight by hand.
Oh, to make it like an equal distribution?
Equal distributed piece. He smooths the top over and continues shaking and leveling it.
What?
There's history saying that it was so sad because these men were so professional. They were so good that just things like age would ruin their entire career.
Oh, yeah.
Lack of strength.
Yeah.
The feeling.
Being able to,
injury. You just couldn't. They couldn't do it anymore.
Could you imagine like breaking your hand and you can't work?
It was a respected job. Yeah. It was a respected job. And so the next process, they lift it up. And after it's been shaken, they move a decal frame on top. And this is what continues to shimmy and presses it down and makes the paper in shape. This is what holds it. This was the next process. So that they didn't have this big floppy loose piece of paper. It was an invention of literally putting another screen, a frame on top with no screen. That's it.
Yeah.
And
so
sometimes
like
they attached a hinge.
Okay.
Yes. And this was actually only invented in the early 1800s.
Oh.
Yeah. It was very new. So before that, the process, they would lift up the mold. And the way that the paper, it would spread out and they would lift it up as it's on a pulley. The next man would hitch it, grab the mold. And if there was a decal later in time, but at this time, there's not. And he would flip it over onto a piece of felt and press it down. And it was called couching. And they would flatten it down. And they would continue to do this layer by layer by layer, just like back to my gold leaf.
Oh, yeah.
So they would continue making these layers. And then they would just press the paper down. And the weight of it would make it perfectly flat and leach out all the water. And actually pretty quickly when they were done with their batch for the day, they would be able to just peel it up and lay it out to dry.
Yeah.
And the word decal continues throughout bookmaking. If you ever have a book that has a raw little ruffly edge, that's called a decal edge. Now, it was because when you would lift the piece up, you had your whole piece of paper. And there was your paper. And it took so much time. Why would you trim it off?
Yeah.
So when paper became modernized and the paper machines were made after the 1800s, very soon after this man invented this decal frame and it became a modern manufacturing process, there was no need because it was a long, complete, this screen, I'm sorry, that was a long pause. This screen would run through the vat. You know, this is all mechanized, lifting up the paper. It's one solid piece. It's immediately pushed into a row with rollers, and it's just squished down manually. There's no raw edge on it anymore. The edge is as sharp and beautiful as you get, and the modernized machinery could cut off the edge.
Wow.
So what ended up happening, as some book lovers love the decal edge and some don't, and it became a status symbol. Because if you were poor, you only had the old handmade books, which is really crazy.
I'm like,
because those still exist. Yeah. And if you had money, you had a machine-made book that had a beautiful, crisp, clean edge.
That kind of makes sense because it's like the whiter, the straighter, the prettier, the more.
It costs more money, which is interesting that it would cost more money to get something made by a machine than it would have been to be made by hand.
I know. That is.
But that's why, because they had to pay more money, and that to maintain anything became status symbols. Back then. So that is that.
Wow. I want to make some paper now. That was really good.
We can absolutely make paper.
Yeah, we should.
We have a little kit.
Yeah.
But I did it when I was a kid, and I think I did. Did I mention this? Maybe it was on Mommy's After Hours.
Oh, maybe.
But anyway, I almost blew out my mom's blender with my dad when I was a kid. Yeah, making homemade paper. And we used like newspaper, and it was gray and hideous.
Yeah.
So that's why it matters.
Yeah. That's interesting. We do have the kits. We should do it. That sounds like fun.
We will record it.
Yes,
I think, honestly,
we probably should.
Even if we don't, we could just do step by step. It's so simple, and it's nice to have a visual. And there's a decal.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, there is?
Yes.
Oh, you looked at the kit. I bought it.
No, I've made paper before.
Oh,
my dad and I made a decal. But it really is a thing that is still used. But there's no the reason why they consider it an extinct craft is because in the UK there are currently no professional artisans who are continuing it. But there are artisans that do it on their own, that we have figured it out. It's a frame, a picture frame.
Picture frame.
With hinges.
It's crazy how it took so long to get to that point.
Yeah, but you can go to Home Depot and buy really fine mesh screen.
Yeah.
And, you know, it really is just, there's no need. And that's sad because anyone can do it now. Mm-hmm. That really is the reason for the decline, is that not anyone can make paper, because like I said, I made it from newspaper. You can, but it was so ugly. The color was so bad.
Yeah.
You know, it does matter. It really does matter.
Interesting. Well,
we should totally try to rot down some like pure.
No, thank you.
I'll do it. I will do it. I know
you will. I'm like, I don't want it. When you were talking about like the flax and whatever.
I have scarlet flax growing in my wildflower bed. That's the red.
Oh.
Yeah, the little tiny red blossoms.
Oh, that's right. We talked about that because I was like, oh, we should do wait, that wasn't flax. Was it flax? I can't remember.
Yeah, we were talking about it.
Okay.
Flax was one of the fibers.
Yeah, it was.
So basically, all we would do is just pull out the grassy bit.
Okay.
Chop it up and let it dry, and then mush it a lot. I'll do it.
I'm gonna do it. Yeah, we should. We'll experiment.
Patreon.
Fun. Yeah, exactly.
Which is exactly what the future of our Patreon is really getting to.
Yeah.
Mommy's After Hours and like crafts, tutorials, our Pinterest fails.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That whole nailed it. You know, it's gonna be us trying to make flax, like the paper. And it's gonna fail or something. It's not gonna be bleached. It's not gonna be
lied in the backyard for 6 months.
No,
isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
Like, what do they do if it rained?
Oh, I know. Well, currently we are dealing with a little bit of a rambunctious crowd outside of the door. So we apologize if you hear my children. The two younger ones just don't know how to be quiet. So we apologize, but hey, we're not perfect.
This is not for perfection.
No,
it never is going to be perfect, and it's not going to be for everyone.
Exactly.
But we love it, and this is fun. And I really, you know, it's funny because you're like, paper, seriously? But how many people do you know how paper is really made?
Yeah.
And now I know why paper mills stink so bad.
Yeah.
That's got to be basically the same thing. They're just rotting wood pulp. That's why it smells so bad.
Yeah, see, we're just providing you with all the fun facts that you could share with your friends on
trivia.
Do you know how to make paper? I do. Yeah.
Whenever.
So.
Yeah.
Well.
That was Mommy's After Hours
content.
Oh,
yeah. Stopped yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that was fun.
It was fun.
I actually really looked forward to that. I was like adding notes to right up till we were recording. I
I forgot. I know, and I'm excited for my case. It kind of took off, and I really did a deep dive into this one. I watched probably 7 hours worth of content just to get as much, to make sure that I wasn't missing anything. And as I was typing it up, and I'm just like, wow, this is a lot more than I thought it was going to be. So I'm excited for mine. It is, of course, devastating. You know, it's not like we're laughing at murder or whatever, or saying we're excited about it. It's just like,
I know how hard she's been working.
Yeah. This is like, I'm, I don't know, not excited, but I'm just like, I'm ready. I'm ready to tell the story. I've been working hard on it, and it's one that I feel like we should all hear.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk to you about Debra Sue Carter.
This isn't familiar to me.
Okay. So in Ada, Oklahoma, on Wednesday, December 8th, 1982, around 11 a.m., Donna went to pick up her friend Debra Sue Carter for lunch. Now, Donna and Debra met in the 9th grade, and they've been friends ever since then. Debra was 21 years old and had just moved into her first apartment exactly 2 months prior on October 8th, 1982. And she lived in a 3-bedroom apartment above a garage, and she lived alone. And this was just a couple blocks from her mom's house, so it's not like she moved really far away. She also had her own car and just was like really proud to be so independent, at 21.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyways, her friend Donna pulled up to her apartment and went up to the porch and noticed some glass. And inside, she could hear there was like a radio playing really loud.
Mm-hmm.
And she noticed that the door was unlocked. So she goes in and she starts calling for Debra. No answer. And she noticed that the apartment was like disheveled. Like the couch was ripped up. There was writing on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And she just knew something was wrong. And so
Yeah.
she's continuing to call out for Debra. And so she goes to her bedroom and she looks inside and she finds Debra nude, face down on the bedroom floor. And Donna immediately ran out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And she went across the street to a payphone and she actually called Debra's mom's, Peggy.
Uh-huh.
And Donna just told Peggy that something awful happened to Debra and that there was like blood on her. And Peggy, of course, freaked out and ran out to her car to drive to her apartment. But her car would not start.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So she's frantic. And this was probably a blessing that Peggy did not have to see her daughter in this state. So police and detectives arrive at the scene and start processing it. One of the EMTs on the scene was so horrified by what they saw that they ran out of the apartment and vomited.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was a horrific scene. Detectives noticed that on the table there was a note written in ketchup that said, "Don't look for us or else." And the words "for" and "else" were spelled wrong. "For" was spelled FORE and "else" was spelled EALSE. So don't look for us or else. They saw that Debra was completely nude except for white socks on her feet. She was face down on the floor, and there was a washcloth that had been stuffed in her mouth. And a cord from an electrical blanket and a belt was found under her body. And her mother later said that those were two things that she had bought her. She bought her the electric blanket and that belt that was found underneath her.
No.
And it was just, horrific. So there was a ketchup bottle found next to her, and there was clear evidence that she was sexually assaulted. There was also a smudge on the bedroom wall that resembled a bloody handprint, and the word "die" was written on her stomach in red fingernail polish. And on her back, the name Duke Graham was written.
Weird.
On the wall in the living room was written, "Jim Smith next will die."
Ooh.
So, a lot of weird messages, and it's a bizarre scene.
Someone trying to throw people in all kinds of
Probably,
directions.
yeah. So detectives dusted for fingerprints and looked for like any other evidence that they could find. And there was one hair that was found in the palm of her hand, and there were also hairs that were found on the washcloth that was in her mouth. During the search of the apartment, Debra's mom was still at home because her car just was not starting at all.
Yeah.
And
she only lived a few blocks away?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Girl,
so, and she's calling and calling and like, and that's then when her sister and friend came to tell Peggy the news that Debra was dead. And Peggy broke down and just started wailing on her sister, like hitting her, and just broke down.
Her own sister?
Yeah, just because she told her, and she was just grief-stricken, you know, just how, why. And nobody had any idea who would do this to Debra. Like, Ada is a really small community, and it's actually so small that one of the police officers on the scene actually went to school with Debra.
Oh, no.
So it's a small town. Debra had, like, no enemies, and so, like, detectives didn't even know where to start. So they decided to start with the two names scribbled at the apartment. So Jim Smith was looked at because he was a known local thug, but was ruled out immediately because he was behind bars.
Of course.
So
maybe they should have done their research.
Yeah. So Duke Graham owned a bar in town, and his alibi is that he and his wife were working the bar until 10 p.m., where then he went home, and his wife and the staff like at the bar corroborate the statement. So he's ruled out as a suspect. One thing to know about Debbie is that she like really liked working and like having her independence, and she wanted to work, get her own place, and then one day get married. But at the time of her murder, like guys were not a priority in her life. She worked at a local coffee shop during the day, and then at night she worked at a country and western club called Coach Light Club, where she would bartend. It was known as a boot scooting bar.
Oh, fun.
So
she was living her best single life.
Yeah, so yeah, she was working. So the night of the murder, she actually was working an extra shift at the bar. And it was a relatively slow night, and a witness said that they saw Debbie talking to a man named Glenn Gore in the parking lot. Glenn was a Little League coach and had gone to school with Debbie, so he knew her. Glenn states that Debbie told him that she didn't feel good, so he walked her to her car. And then a witness says that they saw Debbie give Glenn a slight shove, but she didn't really seem to be angry or upset. So then she just gets in her car, and Glenn goes back inside. And Detective Barrett interviews Glenn, and he just keeps saying that he doesn't know who would do this to her, and says, like, I've never been to her apartment. And so detectives search him to see if he has any scratches, and he doesn't. And he says he left the bar around like 1:15 a.m., which was like way after Debbie left. And someone in the bar named Ron West backs this up, because Ron gave Glenn a ride and dropped him off and told detectives that Glenn said he was like, I'm just going to go home, go to my mom's house.
Yeah.
So detectives then find out that around 2:30 a.m., Debbie had called a friend to come pick her up. She told the friend that there was someone there that she just didn't feel comfortable being alone with.
Oh, no.
And the friend told her that, like, she couldn't come pick her up, and just, thought the call was a little strange.
God,
but yeah, she's
that
like,
poor friend.
Yeah.
And that's what she's going to have to live with her whole life. Not
Mm-hmm.
that it's her fault in any way, but oh my gosh.
One of the shows that I watched was like, she just, has guilt about it.
I bet.
And minutes later, Debbie does call her back and just says, oh, never mind. Like, don't worry about it.
Oh, okay.
And so obviously, like I said, her friend has like horrible guilt over it. So autopsy, it revealed that Debbie really fought for her life. There were defensive wounds that were inflicted while she was alive. So
good
she
for her,
really
girl.
fought.
At least you'd got something.
Mm-hmm. Semen was found, so it was clear that there had been sexual activity or assault. And it was discovered that she had been raped with the ketchup bottle that was found next to her body.
Oh, no.
And the cap from the ketchup bottle was found at autopsy in her rectal canal.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so pretty brutal. Very brutal. And, I can't even, so.
Oh, that means it. Okay, sorry. Had to have untwisted.
Yeah, or something. So it was, So the cause of death was ruled as a strangulation, either from the washcloth that was found in her mouth that was partially down her throat, or the cord or the belt found under her body, because there were clear like ligature marks indicating that something was used around her neck. So it could have been either or both. So 3 days after Debbie's murder, she was buried, and her mother, Peggy, helped bathe her daughter and get her ready for the funeral, but she refused to go. She just couldn't go. But there was just so many people that showed up, so many people that like people had to stand outside. So she was just clearly loved in this small community. Detectives had no leads and no suspects for Debbie's murder. But then 3 months later, in March 1983, a fight broke out in the Ada County Jail. An inmate had started talking about the Debbie Carter case, and another inmate attacked him. So detectives started to think maybe the one guy that got angry was somehow involved. Ron Williamson was in county jail and was part of this fight. In 1987, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he had picked up a woman and raped her.
Oh my God.
Yeah. He was also arrested in Oklahoma City, but found not guilty for that crime. Ron Williamson was born and raised in Ada and was a baseball star in high school, and he actually played in the minor leagues. But then multiple injuries and issues with alcohol ended his baseball career. And he had started showing signs of a mental disorder and started behaving bizarrely and would like go to stores downtown and stand around and stare at women. So he was just a little odd.
Just becoming the local creeper.
Yeah. And he was also known to have issues bothering his ex. And so when detectives discovered that he had been accused of sex crimes in the past, being charged with rape twice in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they figured like, oh, we're on the right track. Let's look at him. And when detectives asked Ron Williamson where he was the night of the murder, he tells them he was at home with his mom. And she backs this up. And she was known to be one that would like not lie, and her word could be trusted. And Ron lived a couple.
When it comes to a mom.
Yeah, but even they said like not even for her to lie for something like murder. You know, she was just a very trustworthy woman. And Ron lived a couple blocks away from Debbie. Like I said, small community. Everyone kind of lives real close to each other. And detectives think that he could have left when his mom like fell asleep and gone over to Debbie's apartment. And a coworker at the Coach Light said that a few weeks before the murder, Ron Williamson was bugging Debbie. And Ron was just being very rude and pushy, and he was known to hang out with like one of his friends, Dennis Fritz. And Dennis was a single dad, and he was a science teacher from Noble, Oklahoma, which was like really nearby. And at this point, detectives are thinking that more than one person must have murdered Debbie because of the note left on the table that said us, like don't come, you know, looking for us.
Oh, yeah. Duh.
So it's like more than one. So they're thinking, oh, it's got to be Ron and Dennis. Okay. So Fritz was brought in. So Dennis Fritz was brought in for questioning, and he was asked about his relationship with Ron Williamson. And, you know, he was asked if they knew Debbie Carter. And really quickly, detectives switched gears to like, we know you did it. Tell us if you and Ron killed Debbie. And Dennis Fritz denies everything. But unfortunately, he has no alibi. So there was like not much he could use to like, it wasn't me, you know?
Yeah.
And I think this is in the 80s, early 80s. So during interrogation, Fritz and Williamson both decide like they'll take a polygraph test. And both tests come back inconclusive. And there was a witness that stated both men had come over to her house late at night. This is a woman saying that they both came over to her house, and she was scared by the way that they acted. She stated she pulled a gun on the men, and that is when they left. Like, she's like, get out of here.
Oh, yeah.
So
good for her.
Yeah. So they were the main suspects in this crime because of how they acted towards women.
Yeah.
And the fingerprints did not match either one of the men. However, the hairs found at the scene were said to be microscopically consistent with Fritz and Williamson. The science in the 80s is like, it makes it really hard to make a clear connection to hairs, so they have to test for similarities.
Right.
So there were 17 hairs that were gathered at the crime scene and compared to both Williamson and Fritz. And the 80s comparison stated that hairs were consistent, microscopically consistent, which is like hair science has kind of been debunked as a true science because you can't really compare for sure. Like, it's just they look similar under a microscope. So furthermore, at the time, semen analysis used blood type, and the blood type of the semen gathered matched both, like it matched both the guys, just the blood type and the hair type or whatever, you know. So at the time, police did need more evidence in order to press charges and arrest both of them. And so because of all this, it kind of grinds to a halt. And then in 1985, Glenn Gore made a completely new statement. Remember, he stated that he saw Ron at the bar and you know whatever. So, now he claims that he saw Ron at the bar hitting on Debbie the night of the murder. And this is bizarre that he would change his story, but it completely helps out the prosecution. And so now they're looking at the bloody palm print, and they're like, we need to see if it's Ron or Dennis's palm print. Because now it's like, oh, Ron had to have been at the bar. It had to be these guys. We have to match their palm print.
Yeah. This is all or nothing, right?
Yeah. And so they're like, we got to see if it matches either one. And it's not a match to either one.
Of course.
And that is when the prosecutor of the case wants to test the palm print against Debbie. So the original analysis showed it wasn't hers, but they wanted to be completely sure that it was, because this is years later. So Debbie's mom was contacted in order to get consent to exhume Debbie's body.
Oh gosh.
And now at this so after Debbie had died, her mom Peggy had taken to drinking like pretty heavy. You know, I can't even imagine losing a child in that way. So, you know, she would drink a lot, and then she would go and like lay over her daughter's grave and talk to her. Yeah, it hit her really hard. She was so distraught over them wanting to exhume her daughter's body, but she agreed, but clearly stated that she wanted to be there when it happened. Like, I have to be there I don't know that I don't know. I think she's just
you never know till it happens.
Mm-hmm.
But she also didn't go to the funeral.
Exactly. So I think she was just like, I need this. I need to be there for this.
Because you never know if she made that decision in their moment of grief, and then after it happened, she regretted it. Yeah. Like, what can you? You can't undo that. So maybe that's what she needed.
Mm-hmm. So she just wanted to be there and told them, like, you can, but I want to be there. You need to let me know when it's going to happen. So on May 1st, 1987, Debbie's body was exhumed. Peggy was not notified.
Oh no.
And was not there for it. And when she finally got there, her daughter's body was gone. They had already finished it. And Peggy was so distraught over this that she was actually admitted for psychiatric treatment after her daughter was exhumed. It was that hard on her. And remember, the whole reason for this was so they can like see if it matched hers. Mm-hmm. And it did. It was Debbie's this whole time. So it's not the killer's palm print. Which is weird that then, all these years later it changed. But they did. They originally tested it and it showed no match. And then now after exhumation, they're saying it matches.
Maybe the quality of the computer. Yeah. Because I think they did it by, they magnify it with, and they basically use like a jeweler's loop or a microscope, right? And they like pin markers.
Yeah, I think maybe the science just got a little better.
Changed. How many years was it again? I'm sorry.
This was in 1987. So it's been 83 or 84. A few years. Yeah, it was a few years. So
science is leaps and bounds all the time.
Oh,
we
every
talked
year.
about that before. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So based on hair, blood matches, alibis, and eyewitness testimonies stating that Ron Williamson was at the bar that night, police are certain that they have their guy or their guys.
Yeah.
And 7 days after Debbie's body was exhumed, on May 8th, 1987, Ron Williamson was arrested in Ada, and then Dennis Fritz was arrested at his mom's house in Kansas City, Missouri. And a SWAT team had actually shown up to arrest Dennis Fritz, and he was like, he had no idea why they were there until he saw Oklahoma detectives. And remembered, like, oh, they had interviewed me about this murder or interrogated me about this murder. So in April 1988, just a year later, the trial for Dennis Fritz started. He maintains his innocence. But a jury finds him guilty of first-degree murder, and he's sentenced to life in prison at the Dick Connor Correctional Center. And 11 days later, Ron Williamson's trial starts. And a witness was called to the stand, and this was Terry Holland. She was a jailhouse snitch who happened to overhear, and she said she overheard a conversation that Ron Williamson had in prison admitting to killing Debbie. And it was at this moment that Ron, in the courtroom, started shouting and screaming that he was innocent, and even tried to flip the table and threw his chair. And
that looks innocent.
Yeah,
acting
and
like a big baby.
Everyone freaked out. It like freaked everyone out, and even his like court-appointed attorney was like, I can't deal with this judge, like I don't want to do, it was just it was ridiculous. So in the end the jury finds him guilty, and he is sentenced to death, and he was then sent to death row at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. So both men maintain their innocence, and after many appeals, Dennis Fritz begins to just like accept his fate. He's like, that's it, I'm in for life. And Ron Williamson was facing a similar battle with his appeals. He had an appeals team, which consisted of investigator Kim Marks and appeals attorneys Mark Barrett and Janet Davis. A direct appeal was initially filed, and he lost. And then a post-conviction appeal was filed, and that was denied. And literally 5 days before Ron's scheduled execution, a stay was issued, and his case was to go before federal court to review if any constitutional rights had been violated. So during the appeal, they looked at his alibi, which was his mother. She stated that he was at home the night of Debbie's murder.
Right.
And like I said, everyone knew her to be trustworthy. She wouldn't lie about something like that, even to protect her son.
Yeah.
And Ron Williamson's mother actually kept a detailed daily journal. And when she checked her journal, she saw that on that day, they had rented some movies and had gone home to watch those movies.
See why journals are important, people?
I have one that's like a line a day or something like that. And you just write like a sentence out of like what you did for the day or a sentence or two. I haven't done it in a while, but
now it can be time-stamped with our cell phones. With
I know.
We take pictures all day long. You're like, look, I wasn't killing someone. I was taking pictures of my cat.
Exactly. I know. It's a lot easier now. Yeah. But then in the 80s, it's like you have mom's journal.
Yeah, exactly.
And She even had a receipt from the night showing the movies that they ordered,
Nice.
like with the timestamp, you know, like when they went.
Yeah.
So she had actually taken this to detectives and gave them the journal and the receipt to help with her son's alibi. Like, he was home with me. I told you he was. Like, I'm not going to lie about this. Here's a receipt. Both of those items go missing.
Oh.
So, yeah, Ron Williamson felt that detectives actually waited to press charges on him until after his mother passed away so that she couldn't be called to testify on the stand to corroborate his alibi. Because she was dead by the time he was charged.
Yeah.
So during this appeal, an expert hair witness testified that the one hair found in the washcloth that was in Debbie's throat was microscopically consistent with Dennis Fritz, and the 2 hairs on the bed were microscopically consistent with Ron Williamson. So now, like I said, hair evidence wasn't a thing. They could only compare to see if they were similar or quote unquote consistent.
And hairs are made the exact same way out of our head, except for, you know, there are markers, but hair is still hair. They're going to be similar.
Yeah.
While they are different, they still are going to look similar. It could just be like a coincidence that they both had kind of the same hair texture.
Yeah. And that's why now it's like DNA. You don't just like, oh, these hairs look similar. It's like, yeah, you can say that, but then you have to further analyze them to see if they truly are from the same person. Right. So since it wasn't a thing, it was like they had to be consistent, which that's what they were saying. So they also bring up, you know, during his appeal, the alleged confession tapes, which happened in 1987 after his arrest. And they literally refer to them as the dream tapes. Oh. This is because the closest thing that they got to a confession was Ron telling them about a dream that he had had.
What?
He told detectives he had a dream that he went to Debbie Carter's apartment and burst in through the door, raped her, and killed her. It was just a dream. And in his description, he didn't even describe the scene properly. Like, it wasn't even close. So, but they were like, oh, we got our confession. But one thing that you should know about Ron Williamson was that he had a history of mental illness and he heard voices. Yeah. So within, like, even just within a few years of him being in prison, he had declined rapidly, like mentally and physically. You
know, prison isn't a place for like positive growth in that way, but when you're already struggling, there's no way you're gonna get better.
Yeah, it's only gonna be worse. He had mental issues, and it was clear. I mean, there was a lot of evidence and proof of mental issues that like should have been brought up in the initial trial, and it was brought up in the appeals process. And Ron was bipolar and had paranoia. He got Social Security disability because of his mental issues, and this was never brought up at trial or even brought into consideration. Yeah. So, yeah, during the appeal, obviously his attorneys brought this up. And they brought up the interrogation tape that was recorded after he had taken a polygraph test. So they continued, you know, it was inconclusive. And he's continuing to talk. And during that interrogation, Ron never wavers that he had, like, no involvement in Debra's murder. And that interrogation tape was over 2 hours long. And it was never given over to the defense. Wow. And this is a Brady violation because there was exculpatory evidence that was not presented at trial. And this is a constitutional violation. They need to turn over everything that they have. So in 1994, 5 years after his conviction, an investigator and his appeals attorney went to the prison where Ron, you know, was and recorded an interview with him. He wanted to tell something. He goes on a rant yelling about how he was an innocent man and that a man named Ricky Joe Simmons was the one who raped and murdered her. Oh. The video is like really intense. He is heated, and he looks like he's gone through it. He's missing teeth. He does not look healthy. Yeah. He's really going through it. So, so anyways, he's just saying like, I know this guy did it. This Ricky, you know, Joe Simmons is the one who did it. And so they're like, okay, they did the video and they were like, is that all you want to say? And he was just like, yeah. And like, I always say like, I'll show you the video, and I never remembered to, but like this was intense. Okay. I couldn't find it. So on their way out, the prison psychologist stopped them and they told them, they were like, I think I know what's going on. And they said that, you know, Ron has an alter ego named Ricky Joe Simmons. Oh. And he uses this because he can't bring himself to confess that he committed the murder. Yeah. And this, however, was not the case. And they had to tell him, like, no, Ricky Joe Simmons is an actual person that lives in Ada. That's not a made-up person.
Okay.
To the psychologist, you know. Which you would think, like, maybe she'll look into, like, is there a Ricky Joe Simmons that lives in Ada?
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, there was. So, actually, this is where it gets really interesting. Because on September 24th, 1987, Ricky Joe Simmons went to police and confessed to the crime.
Oh, what?
Yes. And this confession is on video. And he was telling police that, like, you guys have the wrong guy. And but at this time, detectives are convinced that they had the right guy, or, you know, guys, Ron and Dennis. And so, you know, the detectives are just telling him, like, look, we're really worried about you. Can we, like, make you, you know, we're worried about your mental health. Can we make you an appointment with a counselor? Like, they didn't believe him. They were like, nope, we got our guy. And
gosh, that's not how it works.
Yeah. And so he's like, no, I think that I killed her. But honestly, like, Ricky had his own set of mental health issues. And so he was pretty quickly cleared as a suspect. And so Ron was shown that tape when he was in prison. And that's when he lost his mind and started fixating on Ricky Joe Simmons, that he committed this, you know, murder. And this confession tape was never introduced as evidence by Ron's attorney at trial. And Ron's initial trial, okay, so he had a court-appointed attorney named Barney Ward, and Barney Ward was blind. And the way he got his work done was he had his secretary or his assistant read all the paperwork to him.
Okay.
And he really didn't work hard on Ron's case. And so this was ineffective counsel, and the appeal court agreed. And so a new trial was ordered for Ron based on ineffective counsel. So he's got a whole new trial.
Oh, wow.
And during this time, remember, Dennis Fritz is still in prison, you know, serving life. And he was fighting his own appeals. He actually wanted to help Ron. And Dennis had filed his own appeal when he saw a TV show in the early 90s about advancements in DNA helping solve cases.
Oh, okay.
So this is when DNA started to become a thing. And the Innocence Project was using DNA to help, you know, exonerate people, get people out of prison that did not commit crimes. So Dennis was very smart. Remember, he was a teacher. So he's a very smart person. And so he started doing tons of research into this. And he contacted the Innocence Project, and they have to screen him. But because he was really meticulous, and he had, like, a really amazing letter, and, like, he included everything that they needed to look into his case, like, super quick, he was, like, approved. And so because of all of this, Ron's attorneys became Dennis's as well. So they were like, we'll take you on as well in the appeals, you know. And the attorneys agreed to, like, we're going to do all the DNA testing for both men. Everyone agreed that the DNA should be run. Even District Attorney Bill Peterson, the one who initially was at the initial trial, he was here again. He's the district attorney. And he's like, yes, let's go ahead. Let's test. Everyone agrees. Let's test the DNA. And so the plan was first her underwear and her sheets were going to be tested, and then the hairs. So a few weeks later, DNA results come back. All of the DNA tested from the crime scene did not match Ron or Dennis.
Oh, snap.
It was not them. So a hearing was set for April 15th, 1999. Both Ron Williamson and Dennis Fritz were brought into the courtroom in handcuffs. Mary Long was an OSBI forensic biologist, and she was put on the stand to testify that there were no DNA matches found on any of the samples of either man. And the judge then said, quote, "We use today's science and today's technology to right a wrong. The motions to dismiss will be granted to both of you. Mr. Williamson and Mr. Fritz, you are free to go." And after 12 years in prison, both men were officially exonerated and set free. Now, Dennis,
toothless and mentally ill. How sad is that?
It really is. And it was really sad watching it was like, oh my gosh, heartbreaking, because Dennis hadn't seen his daughter Elizabeth in 12 years because he just didn't want her coming to the prison and being around that and having that be part of her life. So he was just like, go live a better life. You don't need me. I'm in prison. So it was really it was like seeing this reunification of the families was really like, wow, you know. And And Ron Williamson, he goes outside and smokes. He lights up a cigarette. He's just so happy. He's a little kooky.
The cigarette of freedom.
Yeah. And, but it was also sad to see Debbie's mom because, the family is like, I don't know what to
Back to
think.
square one.
The evidence was like, it looked like you made it look like they did it. But then now this new science comes in the 90s and you're telling me that like,
you guys messed up.
Not them. Then
so there's a murderer
is
out.
It? Yes.
Yeah.
So they were like terrified. Like, what does this mean? That her true killer's out there.
This horrific murderer is still in a tiny town, possibly.
Exactly. So now, 16 years after her murder, her case is open again. But this time they have DNA. So they run it through the National DNA database, and CODIS finds a hit.
It's that guy.
What guy?
I forgot his name. It was Ronnie B. Smith Jr. I totally spaced it. I was coughing so much.
So this match was to an inmate on work release serving 40 years for burglary, kidnapping, and firing at a police officer. Inmate 153663, Glenn Gore. He was the guy that changed his story.
Yeah.
His DNA matched all of it.
Ugh.
And unfortunately, he had just escaped from prison that very morning.
What?
Yes. He saw that there was like a match.
Oh, yeah. So he knew.
So he hides out for 6 days and then he eventually just turns himself in.
Mm-hmm.
So the new investigation team looked at all the evidence again and they discover mistakes in the original investigation.
Ugh.
Gore had claimed that he was at home with his mom the night of the murder. She said she had no idea where he was.
Oh.
Okay, so no alibi.
Mm-hmm.
Gore claimed at the time that he had never been in Debbie's apartment, but we obviously know his DNA was everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And Glenn had, given 2 different statements. The day after her murder, he makes a statement saying he saw nothing out of the ordinary at the coach light that night and just went home. Yeah. Then 3 years after that, he changes it to say, oh, Ron was at the bar and he was harassing Debbie. So clearly to push the direction in Ron's direction. So the original statement was never in the files because it was filed incorrectly. So the prosecution just never knew.
Yeah.
And Ron was nowhere near the bar that night. He really was at home watching movies with his mom.
Yeah.
So 20 years later, they're trying to piece together what happened. So this is what they, pieced together that clearly this is what must have happened. So on December 8th, Debbie had worked the bar. And when she left, Gore followed her to her car. She shoved him away and then drove home. Gore then went back into the bar, got a ride home from a friend, but instead went to Debbie's apartment and she let him in. Not so out of the ordinary because, remember, she knew him. Mm-hmm. However, Glenn made advancements towards her, and this made her uncomfortable enough to call her friend to come get her. Then changed her mind, called her friend back, said, never mind. Then a fight happened in the room, and Debbie started trying to fight him off, and then she was raped at some point and strangled to death. And then Glenn stages the scene with all the writings and breaks the window and leaves. Mm-hmm. So that's like, they know that's probably most likely what had happened. They knew they had their guy. Uh-huh. So in April 2001, charges were drawn up and the trial started in 2003. And Glenn claims he had a consensual relationship with her. And the jury doesn't buy this at all. And they find him guilty and he's sentenced to death. Mm-hmm. And, of course, he appeals. And then in 2006, his sentence is changed to life in prison without the chance of parole. So it's just he's now serving life. So, yeah. So all of that just to come to finally, after 20 years, the bright guy's in prison. So, after Dennis Fritz, because, now it's like these 2 men have their lives back. Mm-hmm. So after Dennis Fritz, was exonerated, he became a teacher again. And he traveled the country lecturing about the criminal justice system and the death penalty. And he also wrote a book called Journey Towards Justice.
Oh, love
it.
Good job.
Yeah, so he really was like, I'm going to do good. I want to help other people that are in
after losing so much for so long.
Mm-hmm. So in March 2016, well, I should say not so, but in March 2016, Dennis Fritz got in a car accident when a car pulled out in front of him and he hit it like head on, but he survived. But he ended up with a traumatic brain injury. Oh. So this, unfortunately, it, caused dementia, and now he lives with his daughter. So at least he's, back with his daughter. And then Ron Williamson had actually, after he was, exonerated and this whole Glenn Gore thing came up, Ron called Debbie's mom.
Oh.
And just wanted to tell her, like, I had nothing to do with it. And she was like, I know. And they actually just chit-chat and kept talking, and they would call each other frequently and became kind of like friends, like, because they had this common, like,
trauma.
He's like, I don't hold it against you. It's not her.
It's something that has affected their lives forever.
So, but unfortunately, Ron took to drinking after he was released. He did have mental issues, and so he ended up with cirrhosis of the liver and died on December 4th, 2004, just 5 years after he was exonerated. So he had 5 years of freedom. Bummer. And the author, John Grisham, wrote a book about their wrongful conviction called The Innocent Man. And I think he helped Dennis with his book, because his name's on his book too.
Oh, cool.
And the show on Netflix is also the same name, The Innocent Man.
Mm-hmm.
And so clearly this was just a case of, like, finally DNA, and they got their lives back. And so I think that was kind of the inspiration for John Grisham to write his book. So yeah, that's why I got into a deep dive, because I watched one thing and then I was like, oh, in my research, I'm finding other things, and I find this whole Netflix series. I'm like, I'm going to watch that. But do not watch it if you don't want to get spoiled for next week. Because next week I am going to do another crime. So kind of like a part 2. And it is a crime, so sneak peek for next week. Don't watch that show, because next week it is another murder that happened in Ada, Oklahoma.
Did you even say the show's name?
I think I did. But yeah, I did. Okay. But don't watch it, because it talks about a different case that happened in Ada, Oklahoma, right around the same time as Debbie Sue Carter's murder. So yeah,
333, make a wish.
Wish. So yeah, we that
was a lot. That's so sad. Like, if it could, every time we watch these, I'm just like, it's so watch these. Oh my gosh. Every time we listen to these together, we're both always like, oh my God, it's so sad. Of course it's so sad, but it's just like, there's so many facets to the sadness.
And
poor men.
At least in this case, it, I think, really paved a way for change. And
yeah, for sure. I'm sure the way, like, evidence is presented and how stricter policies for that, even though they were already they just weren't enforced enough, apparently.
And it's interesting because the Innocence Project really does have a hard job of screening people, and they're like, it's really hard to see who's, like, bullshitting you and who's, really innocent. And I can't even imagine, because someone could be, like, really making it look like they're innocent, and then you go down and you do the DNA and it's like, you idiot, you did it. Like, they're, so, but yeah, so the Innocence Project was, on that, it's like a mini series or docu-series or whatever, but yeah, they're doing some good work, but I know they're backlogged, and it's hard to get your DNA compared against a crime you were committed, or convicted of. It's just that you probably didn't even commit. So
yeah,
but thankfully now it's like, I mean, I know my rights, and like, I have my master's in criminal justice, and my specialization for my master's was forensic science. And so I kind of had to, when I was watching this, I'm just like, man, it brings me back to when I was working on my master's. And so I think that's why I got really, really into it, because it's like all of the criminal justice process and stuff. So, but yeah, so that was
a lot.
That was it. Yep. That was a lot. And
you did a good job.
Thank you. And it's not even that long of an episode. I thought it was going to be a lot longer.
I think this is our second longest now.
Probably. But we hope you like the long ones. So next week, I can't guarantee it'll be short. I'm like, I think
mine is still a continuation, but I'm kind of, we'll see.
Yeah. So with that, stay crafty
and not crimey.
Bye.